On a dark January evening in 2020, a 55-year-old man is reported missing in Carmarthenshire in the southwest of Wales. Worried about his safety, his family called the police.
He hadn't come home from work. He'd sent his family a text message, and the message said, "I'm so sorry."
A search of unprecedented scale takes place in the local areas.
The kind of search that the police would have to undergo then would be enormous. You're looking at that area of Carmarthenshire, which is woodlands and rivers and streams and farms, disused buildings. There is so much to consider. It really is looking for a needle in a haystack.
Police begin to uncover evidence that leads them to believe that something sinister is going on.
They discovered crucial insight into what might have happened to him.
Michael always texted in Welsh, and the message that was received by his friends and family was in English.
Investigators managed to track down a suspect, but lack the evidence to prove their theory.
There was a lot of pressure on the police because they could only hold him for 4 days and there was no body.
That's just simply not something that happens very often, and is something that will resonate and stick in the memory for a lot of people for a very long time.
Carmarthenshire, often called the Garden of Wales, is a picturesque county in southwest Wales, known for its rolling hills, ancient castles and scenic coastline.
Carmarthenshire is a very beautiful area of West Wales. You've got the seafront areas and the beaches, which are particularly beautiful. And then you've also got inland, lots of rural area, lots of farming, and also lots of very pretty and historic National Trust properties.
Some of the most beautiful country in the whole of the British Isles. It's an ancient medieval town. It's got a beautiful castle, a priory, and it's the fabled birthplace of Merlin from the Arthurian legend. It's a place stock full of history.
The industry centres around farming and things like that, so there's lots of agriculture, lots of construction. Those are kind of very, very dominant industries in the area.
It's beautiful, it's green. It's a place where nothing really happens.
In places like Carmarthenshire, it would be very rare to see the kind of levels of crime or volume crime or kind of seriousness of crime that you would find in inner cities, in big cities around the UK.
January 27th, 2020, police receive a report of a missing person. 55-year-old Michael O'Leary from the town of Nantgaredig in Carmarthenshire.
On a very cold Monday night at the end of January, Michael O'Leary's brother-in-law, himself a former police officer, made a 999 call reporting that his brother-in-law, Michael O'Leary, was missing and that there was potentially a risk to him.
Police emergency?
Yeah, I want to report a missing person who's a threat to life.
Okay, bear with me. What's his name?
Michael O'Leary.
He hadn't come home from work, and he'd sent his family a text message, and the message said, "I'm so sorry." Now, that obviously gave rise to some fear that perhaps he'd, taken actions towards himself. But there were a couple of interesting things about that message as well that the family noted right from the off. The message was in English, and Michael O'Leary, when he was communicating with his family, would only ever communicate with them in Welsh. They found that, even though it's only a 3-word message, very, very strange. The other thing they noted was he would always use WhatsApp. This was a regular text message, something that he simply wouldn't do. So behaviourally and linguistically, they're looking at this and going, something's not quite right, but primarily, obviously, it's a concern for Michael.
A wide-scale search of the surrounding area is launched to locate the missing man.
Once Michael is reported missing, there is naturally a search for him and for the car that he was driving. His car is located some 4 miles from his home address by the River Towy, indicating potentially, as people might fear, listening to what was said on that text message and where his car is positioned next to a river, that maybe he's come to harm.
They quickly discovered footprints leading from the car or truck to the riverside. So the first impression the police received was, this is a possible suicide.
And of course, the thinking was, has he gone into the river? Has he hurt himself? Has he taken his own life?
All they had to go on was the car, which was locked, but they could see his work phone inside it, and they had to break into the car and see what the phone revealed to them.
Investigators hope Michael's phone will be able to give them information on his disappearance. Meanwhile, the search continues.
The kind of search that the police would have to undergo then would be enormous. You're looking at that area of Carmarthenshire, which is woodlands and rivers and streams and farms, disused buildings. There is so much to consider. It really is looking for a needle in a haystack. But the police have certain tools at their disposal. In this particular case, the senior investigating officer identifies straight away that he needs as much help as possible. And that is through things like helicopters using thermal imaging along the riverbank, so looking for heat sources that might indicate that Michael is somewhere along that river. Using search dogs that can help identify where a body might be. They also use search teams, quite often known as pulsar teams, and they are officers who are specially trained in searching large rural areas such as Carmarthenshire and where Michael's car was found. But this would all be done under a huge operation, a huge load of strategies being brought in for certain areas. But what you have to start with as the senior investigating officer is, right, where was he last seen? So start at that car and then work out.
Investigators begin delving into the life of the 55-year-old Welshman in search of clues.
As the uniform branch was searching for Michael O'Leary, the detectives were investigating O'Leary's phone, but also his background, and they discovered a crucial insight into his character, or what might have happened to him, in that he had been conducting an affair with the wife of one of his best friends.
They went to the same gym together, and they also both attended the local rugby club fairly frequently. They were in a circle of friends that knew one another and knew one another's families very well, so that obviously was something that immediately piqued the interest of the police.
The woman who was last seen with Michael is married to Andrew Jones.
Officers investigating the case will look at CCTV, and once they understand that Michael O'Leary is a member of this rugby club, they understand the rugby club itself has CCTV. And what they discover is 48 hours before Michael has gone missing, he could be seen sitting at the bar with the wife of Andrew Jones. And this is somebody that potentially he is involved in an affair with at the time. They now want to speak to the wife of Andrew Jones and say, okay, well, what is it you're talking about? Can you help us with the disappearance of Michael? She is located at a local hospital, suffering with dizziness, headaches, and memory loss. So questioning her, obviously at that point, is going to be particularly difficult, especially if she says, I don't remember what's happened. The police ask Andrew Jones, who's with his wife in a hospital, well, can you help us with where Michael might be? You know him obviously down at the rugby club. He says, well, the last time I saw him was 2 days ago at the rugby club. The police, now having had the initial accounts from Andrew Jones, obviously move away from that part of the inquiry and continue with the physical searches that are taking place down by the riverbanks.
There was some quite severe weather conditions at the time of the search, and the River Towy burst its banks, which obviously hindered the investigation. The police had to put some aspects of the search on hold just to allow the water to calm down.
But because it had flooded, they couldn't put divers into the river at all, so they had to leave that real only major source and try and piece together his last movements in other directions.
The police began to look into GPS tracking to do with mobile phone analysis. They were looking where Michael had been.
One of the strands of an investigation is when an officer will start to look at somebody's telephone. And this could be calls that they've made or texts made or received, but also it gives you a GPS location as to where that phone was at the time that calls were being made. And what they did have a breakthrough really at that early stage was that the GPS linked to Michael O'Leary's phone showed that he went to a derelict farm at a certain time in that evening. But what was very interesting to those officers was that that derelict farm was actually owned by Andrew Jones.
Andrew Jones told detectives he last saw Michael O'Leary 2 days ago at the rugby club, but police have evidence placing Michael's phone on Jones's farm. Police decide to contact Jones again and confront him with this new information. In Carmarthenshire, southwest Wales, police are investigating the disappearance of 55-year-old Michael O'Leary, who vanished on the 27th of January 2020. They learn Michael was having an affair with a married woman and question her husband, Andrew Jones, who claims not to have seen Michael in days. However, police have received intel tracing Michael's phone to Jones's property.
Andrew Jones is Rhiannon's husband. He's a successful businessman, he lives locally, he runs a building company, well respected in the community.
A rich man for that part of the country, very well known in the area. But the first thing the police wanted to know was, what was Michael O'Leary doing at Andrew Jones's disused farm? Confronted with the evidence from the phone, Jones then went to his second story, which was, yes, I had told you a lie earlier. In fact, I did see Michael on the night he disappeared. I had lured him deliberately to the farm by taking my wife's phone and sending him a message to lure him to the farm because I knew they were having an affair and I wanted to scare him off.
He says that when the pair met there was some kind of confrontation and that Michael O'Leary drove off perfectly safely, having had some kind of exchange between the pair, but nothing more insidious than that.
The suspicions around Michael's disappearance now is teetering almost from a missing persons inquiry to something more sinister. The SIO there has to make a decision whether Andrew Jones is now a person of interest or whether he should elevate him now to a suspect. And I think he describes really where he goes through that thought process thinking, am I doing the right thing? But what he's doing is he's bringing in all those pieces of information he has. So the SIO makes a decision that he elevates Andrew Jones to a suspect, and by that means that Andrew Jones will be arrested in relation to the disappearance, potential murder of Michael O'Leary.
But there's a difficulty for the police because they haven't found a body. They don't have really enough evidence to keep hold of him for too long. They have to act quite quickly.
While they have no body and no actual clear evidence at this stage that definite harm has come to Michael O'Leary, Andrew Jones has lied to them in his first exchange with them, telling them that he hadn't seen him. And then you've got this very clear link between a property owned by Andrew Jones and Michael O'Leary's whereabouts.
Behind all this as well is the time clock, which governs how long you can keep people in custody. Andrew Jones, maximum of 96 hours. And that's not a 96 hours that's given straight away. It starts at 24 hours. You have to apply for a further 12. You then have to apply more so to a court to keep persons in to a total of 96 hours, so 4 days.
It places them under enormous pressure. It's the kind of case, I'm sure, where police officers aren't going home, seeing their family, getting a good night's sleep. They're probably pretty much working to gather all the evidence they need to hopefully make a charge.
Police make the decision to arrest Andrew Jones, despite having little idea of Michael O'Leary's whereabouts.
On the way to the police station, Andrew admits that he has Michael's phone in the pocket of his jeans at home. It's a slightly strange admission that he makes there.
A really strange bit of information to give away, perhaps suspecting the police might find it anyway, so he's looking as though he's going to help. But having this phone in your pocket, in your jeans at home, doesn't fit with the previous story that he's told the police, which is that I confronted him about the affair and then he drove off. It doesn't fit. Well, why would you get involved in having his phone? So this is more information and evidence that the investigating officers will be looking at as thinking this is extremely suspicious.
Once at the police station, police observe Andrew Jones's behaviour closely.
Police were astonished that a man with no criminal record at all, never had any sort of dealings with the police from the wrong side, was so calm and so collected when, having been arrested on suspicion of the gravest crime in the criminal calendar. He did act very calmly, some might say arrogantly, and when the police offered him some reading material while he waited for his solicitor to arrive and interviews to start, he readily accepted their invitation, as long as it wasn't a midsummer murder novel.
He's just making casual comments, really, with the police officers, and just calls his solicitor and says, "I've been arrested on suspicion of murder," as if it was really nothing big.
Wait. No. I'm in Alford police station, arrested on suspicion of murder.
His telephone call to his solicitor, he opens up with, "All right, boy," and then he says, "Sitting down," almost as though he's telling somebody some kind of joke. He's treating the whole process very, very lightly, and he's just been arrested on suspicion of murder, and not just any murder, murder of somebody that is known, loved, and has been a close friend of his for many years.
Andrew Jones is now in custody at the police station, and part of that is that he will be interviewed with a solicitor present and has the right to silence as well. And what you see is that Andrew Jones actually does use the right to silence, says no comment to a large number of questions that are asked.
But Jones did let slip through this rather over-casual attitude and gave the police another grounds to suspect him, because he asked them, somewhat out of the blue at the end of the interview, whether they had discovered a body. He didn't actually ask them whether they had found Michael O'Leary. He actually said, "Have you found Michael's body?"
In the meantime, police conduct searches of Andrew Jones's properties.
They go to his house, and what they uncover is a quite bizarre amount of firearms. 8 licensed firearms, 20 imitation firearms. And when you look at these firearms, you're not talking about small pistols, you're talking about huge guns that would be incredibly scary and obviously incredibly powerful. And it's a real worry that somebody has a need for that many in today's society. Outside of the interviews, they look at the area of the farm that they have, and also about Andrew Jones and his access to derelict buildings and machinery and equipment, plants that people, normal people wouldn't have access to.
Police were particularly concerned about Jones because he was a builder. He ran his own company, and builders have a way of accessing tools and sites where bodies can be easily hidden.
The farm was a quiet farm. It was eerie, it was run down, it was derelict. Imagine what that would have been like at night, which is when Jones said he lured Michael over.
I think probably the best word for the farm is almost spooky. It's really, really isolated, windows blown out and missing, lots of outbuildings, no light really anywhere, lots of overgrown vegetation. The only kind of concession to modernity, if you like, aside from some of the machinery that's there, is there's a static caravan as well in the grounds of the buildings.
The officers investigating now have a huge area to search. Derelict buildings, huge farmland. What they do in the background is they're looking at CCTV. They see that Andrew Jones's property is covered by several CCTV cameras rolling 24 hours a day. So there's hundreds and hundreds of hours of CCTV footage to look through, trying to identify if anything they can see on that is suspicious. Whilst they're doing that, they've got scenes of crimes officers searching through the buildings and derelict buildings. And you can't just go anywhere. This has to start from if somebody came into that site in a car, start at that position and work out.
Time is running out for investigators. They must find concrete evidence that Andrew Jones is responsible for the disappearance and suspected murder of Michael O'Leary, or they will have to release him without charge. In January 2020, in Carmarthenshire, southwest Wales, police have detained Andrew Jones over the suspected murder of Michael O'Leary, whose phone was last active on Jones's property. While in custody, Jones asks if police have found the body, implying O'Leary is dead. Investigators continue searching Jones's farm for forensic evidence. Otherwise, they will have to release him.
They go back to the farmhouse where the GPS had pinged. They start to take a look in one of the sheds and they find a forklift. It looks like it's been concealed in some way. It's been tucked away under a generator. And when they take a look at the forks of the forklift, they find that there's some discoloration and that discoloration is actually blood.
Now that would be rushed off as a priority whilst Andrew Jones is in custody to see whose blood that is. Having searched the farmhouses, they also discovered 2 buttons on the floor amongst the gravel, where the cotton behind the bud is tightly wrapped still. So they've not fallen off naturally. It appears they've been ripped off. Forensic tests later on would show that there's a microscopic amount of blood on these buttons, which would be completely invisible to the naked eye. More so, a scenes of crimes officer noticed something in the gravel, shines their torch on it and sees a shell casing of a bullet that is unusually placed in where it was. In fact, they find about 4 of these casings amongst the gravel also. Having discovered the casing of these bullets amongst the gravel, this becomes a priority to say, well, okay, where have these come from? One of the things that you look at as an investigator, especially now knowing that Andrew Jones is in possession of 8 licensed firearms and 20 imitation firearms, has these casings come from any of his guns? The guns are taken into the laboratory, along with the evidence that you find of these casings. Now, what you're trying to do is match the casings to any of these guns. So they will test the guns and fire them in forensic conditions. What that gives you is on each shell casing is what's called striation marks, and they are almost like a genetic fingerprint to a gun, to the barrel that it comes out of. And then you match that against the casing that you find to say, are there similarities?
The scientists were able to pin the 4 casings, the bullet casings of the .22 bullets, not just to a Colt .22 rifle, but the .22 Colt rifle that was owned by Jones.
The test results of the blood found on the forklift arrive back from the lab.
The blood comes back from the lab under a priority as that belonging to Michael O'Leary. So now the police know that something has happened to Michael, different to what this story is that Andrew Jones says, at that farm, in that location.
All these small little things, as you start to put them together, it starts to become a more clear case. They start to become a bit more confident. There's plenty of evidence that they've managed to get together to find that Michael O'Leary was there and that something's happened to Michael O'Leary. But what they really need to do is to connect that to Andrew Jones. And then they come across a key piece of evidence. They get hold of Andrew Jones's genes, and on those genes there's specks of Michael's blood.
Police obviously searched Jones's house when he was arrested, and there they found clothes, a pair of trainers, some jeans, a green rugby top, all of which bore traces of Michael O'Leary's blood. And this was the killer link between Jones personally and O'Leary, and this was enough to bring the murder charge.
That gives the police enough evidence to give to the Crown Prosecution Service to say all these things put together about the GPS and what Michael has said to his family on this unusual text, what Andrew Jones has changed his story several times, and now the discovery of forensic evidence linking Michael to coming to harm at that farm gives them enough to secure a charge against Andrew Jones.
So the evidence is mounting up. It's looking like they're beginning to build a case, but the key piece of evidence that they need is missing. They still can't find Michael's body.
Investigators continue searching the locality for Michael O'Leary's body and compiling evidence against Andrew Jones.
Officers who are looking at CCTV as part of their role are looking at CCTV everywhere, not just on the farm and the many cameras that Andrew Jones had around that farm, but also in the local area as well. The routes in and out of that farm to see where Michael O'Leary came from, but also what happened after he was lured to that farm. And what they see on these cameras is Michael O'Leary's truck being driven away from the farm. But importantly, not Michael O'Leary driving it, it's Andrew Jones driving that truck. They also then combine that with the information they have with the GPS around Andrew Jones's telephone. And it's following the same journey as that truck as well, giving them great evidence really to say that that truck is with, at the time, Andrew Jones, and we believe he is driving it. Now, even more significantly is that only a few minutes later, they see a bicycle coming back the other way towards the farm being cycled by Andrew Jones himself. And there's only a 6-minute period of time in this, 3 minutes out and 3 minutes back. So officers would draw a circle around a map here and say, well, okay, what's the furthest he could have got in that period of time to allow him to go out and come back? And that helps them then focus on the search for Michael's body.
So they put a radius of 3 minutes each way in that direction on the road to see where he could possibly have been going. And it turned out that the most likely spot was a bridge over a small river. And so the police absolutely swamped it with divers and with investigators, and were delighted to come across what they thought was bones. Sad to see, on examination, it turned out to be animal bones. And it was rather a waste of time, but they had eliminated that particular lead. Once Jones had been charged, the investigation, of course, continued, and they were still desperate for new information. And quite by chance, Jones provided to himself, virtually. His depot, his builder's yard, close to where he lived, was covered with CCTV cameras. It's extraordinary. And they ran 24 hours a day. So the police had hours and hours and hours of everything that Jones did in that yard, leading up to the disappearance and immediately afterwards. The police were quickly able to see a pattern of behaviour. Firstly, for the 2 days before the disappearance, Jones is constantly moving pallets on a forklift truck to the edge of a quarry on the far side of the builder's yard for no apparent reason.
Further inspection of the CCTV cameras shows Andrew Jones acting suspiciously the day after Michael O'Leary's disappearance.
Then he's back and forward carrying buckets, substance unknown. Then he sets fire to this, obviously with an accelerant, and it burns for 5 hours, and Jones watches it burn for 5 hours. Police now had a complete schedule or a scenario of what Jones must have done. He must have shot O'Leary at the farm, transported the body in Jones's own 4x4 to the builder's yard, burned the evidence. 3 stages, the proof was there and the police had got it.
Andrew Jones is officially charged with the murder of Michael O'Leary, but they still need to gather as much evidence as possible, as it is difficult to secure a conviction without a body.
I've been covering court cases for 45 years, and I can't even count on the fingers of one hand the number of times a jury has returned a murder verdict against a killer where no body has been discovered. It is extraordinarily difficult to convince a jury or to prove murder when there is no body. For a start, how do you prove the murder has taken place if there is no body? Just because nobody has seen someone who has disappeared doesn't mean to say he's dead. Secondly, no body, no forensics. The key element of any murder hunt is the state of the body, what forensic stuff can be brought from that. No body, no post-mortem. They have no proof of a cause of death, let alone who might have been able to do it.
Investigators understand that to secure a conviction for Michael O'Leary's murder, they must present an airtight case, proving Andrew Jones guilty of the crime. While Jones may have burned O'Leary's body, could crucial forensic evidence still be hidden somewhere on the farm? In February 2020 in Carmarthenshire, southwest Wales, 53-year-old Andrew Jones is arrested on suspicion of murdering 55-year-old Michael O'Leary after discovering his affair with Jones's wife. Trace evidence of Michael's blood is found at Jones's derelict farm, along with CCTV footage showing him starting a large fire the day after O'Leary's disappearance, where it's believed he burned the body. However, investigators will need more concrete evidence to secure a guilty verdict in court.
Police suspect that Jones killed Michael at the farm, moved him in a truck to his builder's yard, and then burned him on this pile of pallets in this long-lasting fire.
Now, this is looked at evidentially as premeditation. Is he setting everything up ready to lure Michael to that farm to then kill him and burn his body?
Based on the alarming CCTV footage found at Jones's yard, police decide to launch an extensive search of the property.
Andrew Jones basically lives and works, if you like, almost in exactly the same place. So he's got the property itself, and then all around it, lots and lots of land where he's able to do his building work and his quarrying. So all of this heavy machinery and pallets and things like that, none of this is out of place.
Dealing with crime scenes in large rural areas is incredibly difficult. When you're talking about this kind of area as well, which has got gravel and soil and derelict buildings, the search is going to be very, very painstaking for those officers, but they have a task and they have a want to do it. The SIO is driving them to say, you know, this is for the family. They probably won't need much encouragement.
They had 70 tons of soil to sift through after that fire, and they were looking for pieces of bone or anything really that could prove that Michael's body had been on that fire.
Any fillings or anything else that might significantly help with that inquiry and identify not just that there was a body there, but that body was Michael O'Leary. Trying to find any fragment of evidence they can find.
Well, there's an awful lot of manpower being used, but obviously the priority for police is to build this case and to be able to get answers for Michael O'Leary's family as to what exactly has happened to him, and then to bring the person responsible to justice.
It was a huge job. It took dozens of people to sift through all that sand and soil and rubble by hand. It was a massive operation. They did find pieces of bone, but because of the fire damage, it wasn't possible to glean anything from that.
Then the search team makes a discovery that is both significant and gruesome.
The one and only fragment of remains of Michael O'Leary's body was discovered in a rusty oil barrel. And on examination, it turned out to be a small part of his small intestine. And that's all that was left of a huge man, 5'10", 15 stone, heavy built. A small intestine, that's all it was. The police had a duty to put all the new evidence that they had to Jones for his response in an official police interview. And each time, Jones repeated, as is his right, to reply, no comment. It was clear he was trying to form in his mind a possible defence based on the evidence that the police had.
Andrew Jones maintained his very stolid, stonewalling approach to not giving them any answers, even when police kind of changed tack, if you like, and start saying, can you help us? Almost to give some resolution to the family of Michael O'Leary, a family that you know well, and even under that kind of pressure and under that kind of scrutiny, and even presented with the increasing amount of evidence against him, Andrew Jones continues to maintain this very staunch silence.
Jones's uncooperation adds a layer of difficulty to the casework, but police and prosecutors push on, working tirelessly to prepare for the trial.
Even from the outside, it's impossible to say exactly how much work goes in, but I think even if you thought it's an awful lot, that's probably an underestimate. This is something that lots and lots of people are working round the clock on for months and months and trying to tie up kind of every eventuality, having to disprove everything, check everything, to make sure that their case is absolutely watertight, because the last thing that they want is somebody that they believe to be very dangerous, somehow free to walk the streets, and the very last thing they want is not to get justice for Michael O'Leary and for his family that loved him so much.
The trial begins on September 14th, 2020, almost 8 months after the disappearance of Michael O'Leary.
The police and everybody else in court was absolutely on the edge of the seats to see what possible defence Jones would produce. He entered a plea of not guilty to murder, but accepted his responsibility of having been at the scene of Michael O'Leary's death.
Perhaps another indicator of his arrogance maybe decides he'll go down the not guilty route and put everybody through the difficulty of a 3-week trial.
And the story he put forward, based on a large number of tears as he was in the witness box, was that he could not possibly have harmed Michael O'Leary. He was one of his best friends, 5th or 6th best friend he had in the world, he said. He knew this family, and he got on very well with them. Yes, he knew about the affair, but he didn't blame O'Leary for it.
The court hear from Andrew Jones to say that, yes, he lured Michael O'Leary to the farm to talk about the affair that he was having with his wife. And, of course, at that point, a scuffle took place. And during that scuffle, a gun went off because Andrew Jones was holding a rifle, a huge gun when you see it. And that accidentally, during that scuffle, Michael O'Leary was shot. It was an accident, and that is what Andrew Jones is telling the court.
Yes, he had produced a gun, but he never pointed it at O'Leary. He wanted him to leave his family alone. And to try and reinforce that, he had fired 2 or 3 shots into the ground. But, he claimed, O'Leary then grabbed him, a scuffle ensued, and somehow a shot was fired straight up through O'Leary's chin, killing him instantly. But Jones said that he had no idea whose finger had been on the trigger at the time, but of course it was entirely accidental, or so he said.
Andrew Jones, now with Michael O'Leary lying dead in front of him, having been shot by his own rifle, says that to the court that he put Michael O'Leary's shoes on and drove that Nissan vehicle away from his farm.
The prosecution effectively catch Andrew Jones in a lie.
But police have been able to prepare for this eventuality, and they're able to disprove that version of events because they take this to their experts and they say, well, what would happen if this had happened? If Michael O'Leary had been shot at those kind of close quarters, they would expect to find blood spatter from him on that gun. They conduct a very thorough examination of the weapon. There is no blood spatter, and they're able to disprove Andrew Jones's version of events. You would think when there's been such a body of evidence built up against him and, you know, a kind of a creep, if you like, of more things being found all the time, his own version of events being disproved in terms of the evidence around the gun and there not being Michael O'Leary's blood on it, you would think that at some point Andrew Jones might take a more pragmatic approach and go, OK, hands up, I'm guilty. Not only would it draw proceedings to a close and give, you know, the loved ones of Michael O'Leary some closure much more quickly than putting them through the agony of having to hear lots of detailed evidence in a 3-week trial, but it would also account for some kind of reduction in the sentence he's going to face. And when you don't have a body, it's almost, in a sense, the absence of the evidence that is the most important thing, because the fact that he has then taken the steps to get rid of Michael O'Leary's body in such a brutal way. I mean, there isn't a kind way, really, to dispose of a body, but, you know, to seemingly have effectively incinerated his body, and for the only trace of him to be, you know, a 10-centimetre piece of small intestine. In some ways, the strongest, almost eye-catching piece of evidence is the evidence that isn't there.
Even though Jones had come up with some sort of fatuous explanation about how the gun had gone off, he still could not explain burning the body. He told the jury that he just panicked in the moment. It was all too much for him. And that he did stage the fake suicide, but he'd done it to try and protect Michael O'Leary's family from the shame, as he described it, of Michael being involved in an affair. And that, yes, he had set everything up, that he had set fire to the body, but he had conducted some sort of ancient funeral service to try and give it some sort of religious significance. It was such an incredible load of baloney that was clearly a desperate attempt to try and fit a flimsy defence, any sort of defence, around the overwhelming evidence that the police had produced.
On the 14th day of the trial, the jury are finally asked to deliberate.
The senior investigating officer and his team will be quietly confident, really, that they have a significant amount of evidence against Andrew Jones for the disappearance of Michael O'Leary. But what they're always thinking in the back of their mind, and these are one of the hardest things to investigate, certainly in homicides, is the fact they don't have the body of Michael O'Leary. They don't have the evidence which would have been gleaned through a post-mortem about exactly what happened. But all the circumstantial evidence, the hours of investigation that have been put in, the months of searching, the meticulous way in which that SIO went through his case and went through all the things he needed to do to prove that, it was an extraordinary piece of policing.
The jury took 13 hours to return a majority verdict of 11-1 that Jones was guilty of murder. And he was sentenced to a life imprisonment, as is mandatory, where the judge fixed the minimum term before Jones could be considered for release at 30 years. But the judge was making no two ways about it. He told Jones that he would be eligible for parole in his 80s, but the overwhelming probability is that he wouldn't get that far, that Jones would die behind bars.
I think Andrew Jones is somebody that just has got an incredible inbuilt level of arrogance. To have gone all the way through this process and tried to maintain a not guilty plea is extraordinary in the face of the evidence against him, and an incredible level, presumably, of pride to decide that somehow, that evil, that methodical planning, and then to kill somebody that you would consider a friend for so long, to kill them in cold blood, it just takes an almost kind of, you know, pathological disassociation from any kind of empathy or compassion. I think he's somebody that is entirely lacking in any sensitivity or human feeling, really.
Despite getting justice for their loved one, Michael's family must live with their devastating loss.
The lack of a victim's body in this case is incredibly difficult to investigate, and hat to be taken off to the investigation team for to present this case in the way they did, the way they conducted themselves through this case, and the way that the family conducted themselves too. People talk about closure. It's not a word I really use with families or ever have done, because there is never a form of closure. You never forget what's happened. They relive these days all the time. It's another stage of moving on in their life, as a legacy and thinking about their loved one.
To lose a loved one through such brutal ways is difficult anyway. But then to not be able to have a proper burial, to not have a grave they can visit, it just further compounds their distress.